And on indulgence, I give the call to the honourable member for Gorton.
Well, thank you, Speaker. Can I first start by my long understanding of the importance of parliamentary committee reports? No one's more important than this place, of course. And it is true that I've been elected on 8 occasions to this magnificent place since 2001, and I wish to place on record my heartfelt appreciation to the electors of Gorton for their constant and abiding support for so many years. Melbourne's west and northwest have witnessed the fastest population growth of any part of Australia over the last 2 decades, growing by 3 electorates, Gorton, Fraser and Hawke, in that time. But so much has changed since I was elected in 2001. As I sought to gain sufficient local support to be pre-selected as the Labor candidate for that election, an historic, shocking and tragic assault on the World Trade Centre in New York seared into our memory, and everything as we knew it changed. It precipitated 2 invasions, the first of Afghanistan to displace the Taliban regime and supported by the UN, and the second of Iraq, which was not UN-sanctioned, motivated by what later was determined to be a falsehood, namely to dispossess the country of weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. And while we, no doubt, will continue to argue about the rights and wrongs of post-September 11 actions, there was no doubt that the world had changed utterly. The rise of non-state threats, of heightened security, of challenges to individual freedoms and of growing community anxiety were hallmarks of those years and continue to this day. In those early years, I recall chairing a caucus committee, this is my first year of parliament, and attempting to manage debates on the ASIO bills that were involving former senior Hawke and Keating cabinet ministers, which I have to say was a little daunting, Speaker. But these debates dominated my first term, and while there were plenty of politics at play here, with a wily John Howard seeking to wedge the Labor opposition, the competing interests of personal freedom and national security were real, and efforts to find the right calibration difficult. These were my early memories of how the world had changed irretrievably, and the responsibility of government and of this place to keep Australians safe without unjustifiably encroaching on the rights of our citizens was paramount. Before entering Parliament, national security was not my first concern, but that of economic and employment security. And I advocated on behalf of low-paid workers, and so upon election I was keen to ensure progress was made on these matters so important to so many Australian working families. The Howard government, however, was intent on removing protections and weakening the capacity of workers to bargain, and after securing the majority of both houses in 2004, it set about radically altering the industrial relations landscape with the introduction of work choices legislation. This threat to Australian workers was an opportunity for the Labor opposition, and I had the good fortune of chairing Labor's Work Choices Task Force, accompanied by Chris Hayes, who was then, of course, in this place, as we travelled across the country with other members and senators, listening to the stories of victims of work choices and doing our very best to make sure we sent that message out across the country. It was here that I appreciated the reach of radio and regional television to get a message out, and most of my efforts were making sure that I got a tax on the government up on hourly bulletins on radio stations large and small for about 18 months. After my first years, therefore, were dominated by national security, I considered this a more conventional contest between Labor and the coalition about the economic employment security of the Australian people. And the election of the Rudd Labor government was, firstly, a remarkable effort and an absolute significant moment in our history, and was due mostly to a disciplined opposition, a well-executed campaign by Kevin, and an old-tired government out of ideas whose industrial relations laws had for once not been civilised by the crossbench Senate, given the government's majority. The laws were so severe they saw a Prime Minister not only lose the election but lose his seat for the second time only since Federation. If the first 6 years as an MP taught me anything, it was that if a party was to govern, it needed to focus on economic security and national security. It's why later on, after holding security portfolios, I was very much involved in the debate with others to change the national platform and policies to make sure that we had strong, balanced and fair but strong border protection policies to ensure that the Labor Party maintained itself as an electable government party. I also began to fully appreciate at that time the extraordinary breadth of matters considered by federal members. I mean, what other job or formal role compels you to consider, to debate, to decide, and in many cases to implement so many matters that are so diverse that are in the public interest? This is underlined, for me at least, as a minister in many portfolios where I introduced anti-dumping measures to stop the decimation of our steel industry, introduced the first working with children legislation for the Commonwealth jurisdiction, enacted the first criminal sanctions to protect children from online grooming and procuring online, ended the decade of obstruction by states and territories to create, finally, an adult gaming classification for gamers, which was just as well, given today there are 17 million Australians that define themselves as gamers and the average age is 34. I can recall being involved in decisions of the National Security Committee and in being involved in the deployment of Australian Federal Police as Home Affairs Minister to Afghanistan to train Afghan National Police, to build civilian capability, and I visited them in Tarankot. Reformed employment services to help the most disadvantaged job seekers, appointed the first Federal Small Business Commissioner and was associated with the introduction by the then Treasurer to introduce instant asset tax write-off, which was so critical for small businesses. Opened many social and community housing projects, giving people in need a home. Unbelievably diverse work that I've had the great fortune to be involved in, supported by dedicated ministerial staff, diligent public servants, security agency personnel, and most often the continuation of the work of other ministers or shadow ministers working in these portfolios before me. And that is why, ultimately, politics is a team game. You can have your individual moments of recognition. You can be the name of a reform or on a plaque on a building somewhere. But you're mostly adding, hopefully improving, something that came before you. Obviously, the election of new governments bring about real changes. And I agree with Keating when he said, when you change the government, you change the country. But there are more often times when your work as a shadow minister benefits your successor no less than your policy success has benefited from the work of your predecessor. And I'm proud of the policy work I undertook in opposition, in industrial relations, in industry and defence, as I'm thankful to be influenced by the work of others that came before me in my ministerial portfolios. Well, Labor ones, that is. Politics is a team game. Our ministry and our caucus is replete with talent and enriches our policy breadth and depth that no one MP or minor party could ever replicate. Politics is competitive even within one party, but to be sure it requires collegiality, and you're marked down if you don't work together, and rightly so. More than that, of the things I'm most proud that's directly attributable to me, my prouder moments are being part of the signature policies of Labor governments. Now, Speaker, I see the decline in support for major parties, therefore, as concerning, as a talented, well-functioning government party is not only important for this parliament to work properly, but for the country to be well led. Independents and minor political parties can play an important part in contributing to our democracy or holding governments to account, but it cannot be said that they can provide sufficient stability, particularly at a time of societal discord or civil unrest. This nation is best served with an elected government formed by a coherent and unified political party, and that is exactly what we have in the Albanese Labor government. In my 23 years, I have to say the divisions and community anxiety is as high as I've seen them. And I don't believe this is an Australian phenomenon, but rather a global one. Since 2001, non-state threats have risen and our region is less stable and more contestable. Democracies are under more challenge and autocracies are emboldened. To respond to the regional challenges, we are reconfiguring and relocating our defence assets under the Defence Strategic Review and strengthening our partnerships and our alliances. To mitigate other risks, we need to have a greater focus on domestic policies, not just the capability of our security agencies, but other policies that seek to include, not exclude, seek to unite, not divide. As Home Affairs Minister, I was constantly briefed by the AFP and other agencies on the approach needed to reduce radicalisation and homegrown threats, reaching out and building bridges with community leaders. This was what was put to me by those agencies. And after all these years, I believe an even broader approach is required. Tolerance towards communities, whatever their race or faith, should be the responsibility of everyone in this place. Not just tolerance, but support and engagement. We are arguably the most successful multicultural country in the world, enriched by diversity, whether that is language, music, art or food. I can walk a kilometre from my home in Melbourne and choose to eat in a dozen restaurants with different cuisines. We are lucky to live in this country. Now, as a migrant of Irish descent, I'm immensely proud of my ancestry, but as you might have noticed. But I have an abiding affiliation to this country I love. We should embrace our diversity and all who call Australia home. And as important as this, we all have a responsibility to pledge a fealty to our Australian family. There is a reciprocal obligation. On a continent that is home to the oldest continuous culture on earth for more than 60,000 years, everyone since, or their recent antecedents, have migrated here in a mere 250 years. And that is part of my personal story that I share with millions of Australians. I was 6 when I came to Australia when the population was 12 million. My parents were hard-working and looking for a better life for themselves, but mostly their children. Our first home was half a Nissen hut at Holmesglen Migrant Hostel, which just so happens now is the location of Holmesglen TAFE, which was the first visit I had as Skills Minister with the Prime Minister 2 years ago. Back then, there were no ablutions in the place we lived. We had common dining halls, shared bathrooms, but located within touching distance of opportunity. And however well my journey from migrant to Immigration Minister reflects well on me, it says more about this country. Few countries are so generous to first-generation migrants. This country is at its best, as the PM might say, when it doesn't leave anyone behind and it doesn't hold anyone back. And to be sure, this egalitarian trait is forever tested and challenged, and if we are to truly live up to our promise, it needs to be cultivated and protected. Affording opportunity strengthens resilience and cohesion. While I once considered Labor policies such as fair industrial relations laws, universal health care, universal superannuation, equitable access to education and training as essential for individual economic security, I increasingly consider these matters as also part of our national security and our societal well-being. Not just good policies that stand on their own, but an antidote to extremism and division. You see the rising power of neo-fascism in Western Europe, whose win in France was only just averted. We need only turn our eyes to our friend and ally, the United States, to see the division and polarisation ever increasing. And at the heart of this political malaise, not the only cause but the predominant one in my view, is its growing inequality, the assault upon well-paid and secure work, the hollowing out of the middle class and the shift of its wealth to the top 1% over nearly 50 years has had a catastrophic consequence. And I hope our American friends will find a way to heal and come together, which is so important. And I'm also aware that we're not immune to these threats, and we must be vigilant to avoid going down that treacherous path. Speaker, I have a lot of people to acknowledge and thank, and the list just keeps getting longer the longer I've stayed here, I have to tell you. I'm going to try and do this quickly, but may I thank all the hard-working public servants. I've worked across portfolios, without which the work I did could not have happened. Can I thank the parliamentary staff, the cleaners, the security personnel, the parliamentary attendants, the tech staff, the library researchers, the Comcar drivers for their support over the many years. My current staff, starting with the incomparable Julie Leggetti, who's up in the gallery there, can't believe you were crazy enough to come back and work for me after the first time. Not only an excellent advisor, but a great supporter of not only my staff, but many ministerial staff across government. Thanks. To my remarkably dedicated, intelligent and decent crew, Nick Green, Justine Everson, Aaron Smith, Simon Kent, Matt Ryan, Kylie Jensen, Anne Claven, Gus Viola, Baroni Speed, Ben Ansell, Matty Childs and Khalil El-Samad. A special shout-out to Alison Thuma for working as my executive for every day since I served as a minister since 2008 and making my life easier. Logistics are everything in this job. Thanks, Al. To my excellent chiefs of staff, former chiefs of staff, the remarkable Yvette Nash, our very much missed and friend, the unforgettable, inspirational Peter Murphy, Julian Sidebottom and Glenn Atwell, thank you. To others who contributed in such important ways, Campbell Giles, Talis Richmond, Steve Wetnall, Catherine McMullen, Jane Stenson, Melissa Arch, Christian Tobenschlock, Shane Benetti, Isaac Trianon, Dylan Steed, Christine Tyrrell and Elise Murphy. To my magnificent electorate staff who have so often represented me in my absence, including Colin Robinson, Julie Wintle, Sean Payne, Dimitri Sergis, Robin Bosnovsky, Stacey Newan, Adiam Sengay, Joe McMillan, Carol McKenzie, Nicole Camilleri, Alice Ryan, Catherine Campbell, Phil Clark, Nathan and Tristry Barley. I have been here for 23 years, so that's why there's a lot of staff. They tend to stay with me, though. It's been that long. To my parliamentary colleagues over the many years, name them. If I name one, I have to name all. So, for this term, but for all 8 terms, it's been a pleasure. To the electors of Gorton, to the Labor movement, and I see Michelle Upneal up there representing the ACTU and others, to the great Australian Labor Party that allowed me to serve here, I can't thank you enough. I just might get a drink. Can I thank my entire O'Connor clan for their help over all the years. I'll also be very indebted to the Camilleri family for looking after Una as one of their own in the early years when I was away so often. Thank you. In my first speech, I thanked quite a few, and I thank them again, but can I repeat my acknowledgement of the vital role that Jodie Dack played in my career and my life? We are volunteers, but family are conscripts, and Jodie was my partner in crime for many years, of which I'm so grateful. My life has been different and sometimes challenging as a sole parent over the last 6 years, and I want to thank Stacey McGregor for her love and support in recent years. A city polly and a country equine vet is not the most conventional matchup, but it absolutely works. You have brought personal happiness to my life again. I thank you, and I look forward to us spending more time together. To my daughter, Una, you've been remarkably strong and resilient, and your mum would be immensely proud, as am I. I sometimes couldn't work out who was looking after who, Speaker. I guess we were looking after each other. Without your acceptance of my role here, I would have left this place a long time ago. I definitely will see more school drop-offs and pick-ups ahead and fun times during school holidays. If I may speak, I might finish on my reflections of this place and this government since the election. I'm aware I've painted a picture of changes that aren't particularly rosy, about unrest and division, but there are some very clear positive changes that have happened. When I look across this chamber, the composition today more closely resembles the Australian society compared with when I first arrived. Firstly, and most noticeably I think, there's appreciably more women, which is, I think, mostly owing to the transformation of the Labor caucus, which now has a majority of women in it. This has been supplemented recently, I should also note, by the rise of crossbench independent women, mainly replacing Liberal men. This significant change makes this a better place, and equally more First Nations MPs and the growing diversity of ethnicity and faith presents more accurately the face of modern Australia, and that is also better and healthier. Finally, I hope you don't mind, I wanted to just briefly touch on the skills portfolio. Because I have had more complex and I've had more controversial portfolios than that of skills and training. Portfolios with higher profiles, let's say, and day-to-day challenges, but I have loved every minute of the skills portfolio. As I said publicly recently, the Prime Minister showed the foresight in providing this tertiary sector, which pretty much supplies half the skills to the labour market, a standalone minister with resources and authority to elevate it nationally in a way that has not happened before, especially given the skill shortages we were inherited. And, Speaker, it was a very good call. In that time, we created Jobs and Skills Australia, with 10 tripartite industry skills councils, struck a 5-year $30 billion national skills agreement with states and territories for the first time in over a decade. And, of course, we have now 500,000 Australians who've enrolled in fee-free TAFE in less than 2 years. We've put TAFE back at the centre of the vet sector, empowered the regulator to clean out dodgy providers, opened access to literacy and numeracy education for all adults, and provided more support for apprentices. And there is a response to the review of the apprenticeship support that has to be undertaken by the government, which I'll be watching with great anticipation. The Commonwealth has for too long acted more like a funding body in this area, in the vet sector, rather than a strategic co-leader. And the reason why it's so important we change that, because the goal of this portfolio is very much the means by which we achieve other national goals. If we're to build 1.2 million homes, have a future made in Australia, transition to renewables and achieve net zero emissions by 2050, we need our education and training sectors, schools, TAFEs and unis, to lift. So I wish my successor well and all the very best in working in this very critical portfolio. And while we have so much work to do, this government, functioning as a coherent, cohesive and considered team, appreciate the connections and collaboration required across government to build capability and resilience needed in these challenging times. I have served in 3 governments and sat in opposition engaged with 4 more, and I consider this government the most experienced and united. It will continue, I have no doubt, to be fiscally responsible, to be focused on the things that matter to the Australian people, like tackling cost of living pressures, and will do what Labor governments do best, which is build our capability by bringing people together, improving opportunities for all, not just some, and working to ensure that this nation lives up to its great promise of being a strong and richly diverse, harmonious Australia of which we can all be proud. Speaker, just 2 final tips. First, this chamber is a place of contest and debate, and of course it gets willful at times, and that's fine. Parliament did replace the battlefield to resolve disputes, after all. But the more often common humanity can transcend partisanship, it might bore the media outlets, but the public will mark us up. And finally, it is a great privilege to sit in this place, so take your role very seriously while not taking yourself too seriously. Thank you very much.
And on indulgence, the Prime Minister.
Speaker, when our new ministry met for the first time on the 29th of July 2024, it was the first time that any Labor ministry had sat since 2006 that didn't include Brendan O'Connor. You couldn't ask for a better colleague than the member for Gorton, and you certainly wouldn't find a more decent human being. I met Brendan O'Connor a very long time ago, going back to, I think, probably the 1986 Australian Young Labor Conference held in Sydney. We were at primary school at that time, obviously. And so, for a lot of our life, we have been on the journey together. And I have been privileged to share that journey with someone who has integrity, who has the respect of everyone across this parliament, but most importantly as well for a political party that can often be quite fierce in our internal battles. And I think Brendan is right to point towards the extraordinary unity that characterises this, not just government, but this caucus. Brendan has retired without, I think, making any enemies. And that is pretty extraordinary for someone who has been in this place. As Minister for Skills and Training, he of course was instrumental in setting up Jobs and Skills Australia, doing in a really modest way the first skills agreement that has been done in Australia for more than a decade. He got it done without premiers or chief ministers ringing me, without there being argy-bargy. Didn't go through National Cabinet. He just got it done by dealing with people in the honest and frank and clear way that has characterised his performance in political life. His reforms to TAFE and training have changed the perception of TAFE. The truth is that for some period of time, the Commonwealth governments have said that TAFE is just about states and territories. There's no role for the Commonwealth. He has put it front and centre of the skills and training agenda of our national government. And the fact that over 500,000 Australians have participated and benefited from fee-free TAFE, importantly in areas of skills shortage, has not only helped them, it's helped our national economy and productivity as well. He's given these Australians new skills and self-confidence to find a new job, to embark on a new career. And I've been to so many TAFEs with Brendan where we've met people who are either just starting off, having left school, or they're getting retraining in a new job as the economy has changed. That's just one example of the member for Gorton changing lives for the better. Now, on a personal note as well, the many of us who count the member for Gorton as a friend know how difficult it was for him to continue his work in politics following the very sad passing of his beloved wife and Una's beautiful mum Jodie back in 2018. And no one would have thought less of him if he had chosen to walk away at that time. So my thanks go not just to Brendan but to Una and to the broader family as well for letting us have him for another 6 years, and Brendan being an important part of the return of Labor to government in 2022. Our party and our nation are better because of the contribution of Brendan O'Connor as a member for Gorton, but also as a minister in the Rudd and Gillard governments, as well as the government that I'm proud to lead. He deserves every happiness and success in the future, and he will depart this place at some time between now and, if we choose not to have a half-Senate election, which would mean we can go till September next year, at some stage we will wish him every success in the future, because he certainly deserves that. Well done, mate.
Do you want to speak on this?
Thanks, mate.